This is Yet Another MBA G.O.A.T, a podcast featuring conversations with the greatest of all time MBA alumni from the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. We're here to celebrate the outcomes of graduate management education and to identify remarkable examples of how the MBA program here at the Jindal School has transformed the lives of our alumni. Now, here's Dr. Monica Powell, Senior Associate Dean and Graduate Dean at the Jindal School. Take it away, Monica.
Well, hello there. I'm Monica Powell. I'm the Senior Associate Dean and Graduate Dean here at the Jindal School, and I am thrilled today to have one of my favorite all-time MBA students with us, Andy Cyders. Welcome to yet another UT Dallas MBA G.O.A.T. How does it feel to be a GOAT?
Feels great. I think I'm most typically the worst at anything, so it feels wonderful to be in the GOAT category, and I'm really glad that I can be with you today.
I cannot believe, Andy, that it has been 9 years since you graduated from the program. So, wow, you're now big time, way down the road in terms of advancing your career. And it looks like you landed a new job as a chief of staff recently. So why don't you tell everybody what you are doing and what you did just before this in order to kind of utilize and take advantage and get the value proposition of the MBA?
That's a great question. I think one of the things for me that stands out about the MBA at UT Dallas was the breadth of coursework that we have. So the fact that I was required, along with the rest of the students, to study finance and operations and information systems and org design and all of those different attributes, aside from my individual concentration in operations and consulting, really allowed me to be a strong generalist. And I think in 2020, with the increasing integration of every type of business, and particularly healthcare, which is what I work in, having that skill set that was really broad from the MBA to enable me was really a game changer for me. So prior to this role, I worked at Humana, the large Fortune 50 in health insurer based in Louisville, Kentucky. And I worked a variety of roles there. I was really fortunate that Humana has a culture where they actually incentivize lateral moves. They'll give associates 8 to 10% or more raises for a lateral move, which is pretty unheard of. And the reason is they want people to be cross-trained. So if somebody's working in a clinical area where they're supporting frontline physicians and doctors, they want that person to have claims experience or finance experience or operations experience and vice versa. So I did a whole variety of different roles at Humana, including supporting value-based care, which is basically transitioning away from quantity of care to quality. So what does a patient really need for their health, and how do we really drive that? And based on that experience at Humana, I started in June of 19 at the Everett Clinic, which is a large, about $700 million multi-specialty clinic business in Everett, Washington, just north of Seattle. And they were, a month after I started, they were acquired by Optum, which is part of United Health Group, the largest healthcare company in the world. And my job as chief of staff is essentially to support formerly the president of the Everett Clinic. He's now a regional executive vice president over the entire region of the Pacific Northwest. And his name is Dr. Eric Kaufman. He is also a UT Dallas MBA. His job is to, before he was the actual president of the clinic operations and our independent physician association, which is all these affiliate doctors that we provide services to. And now he runs our strategy, our growth, our operations, and our value lanes. And my job as his chief of staff is to help him and the people underneath him be successful. So the chief of staff role is really interesting. It's basically somewhere between mini CEO and fancy secretary. I really get an opportunity to learn something every day. I've represented our company with the governor of Washington, and I also print PowerPoint slides and staple them. So it's a really interesting job where I get to do everything in between. And so it's unlike any role I've had, and I'm really grateful to be in this position.
Andy, that really sounds fascinating. I'm a little bit curious. How did you find him? He's an alum. Did you know he was an alum? Did you remember all your networking lessons that you connected with him on LinkedIn? How did a UT Dallas alum find a UT Dallas alum?
Well, I would love to tell you that I did it through my just natural charisma and charm, but the reality is that I was actually reached out to by a recruiter who had looked at my LinkedIn page, and I was one of those people who's passively looking all of the time, wasn't actively applying, was pretty happy with my role at Humana. But I think they saw not only the strong foundation that the UTD MBA provided, but also the variety of roles that I had. And to be successful in the chief of staff role, you really have to be flexible. And they reached out to me. It's 2020, so I did what any good Gen X person does, and I immediately Googled him, looked at his LinkedIn. I went, oh, he went to UTD. I reached out to some of the UTD staff and said, do you know this guy? What are the thoughts? And people poked around within UTD for me and came back that he's on top of being a really smart person, most importantly, he's a really nice person. He's a really good person. And so it says two things for me. Number one, that he left an impression on the staff at UT Dallas. And number two, that 8+ years removed from my experience in the MBA, Lisa and Joanna were willing to show up for me as an alumnus and make sure that I was getting what I needed when I hadn't asked for the school. And so, yeah, it was just serendipitous after that. I went through the interview process and it all worked out and I was selected for the role, and it's been the coolest opportunity I've had in my career.
Yeah, Lisa Schatz, who's our Assistant Dean for MBA programs, and Joanna Fowler, who really leads our admissions and operation team. I think they should get a lot of credit for the help that they offer alumni when they find themselves in that transition. Andy, I'm pretty actively involved with all MBA students, and it's one of the things that I just absolutely love. And you were a ball of fire and a ball of energy when you were in the program. So when you kind of think back to all of that, I mean, you've grown up into this, all-important chief of staff kind of guy. But when you look back to the MBA program, what do you think on the social side helped prepare you for the amazing career that you've had in the last 9 years? I mean, you've done some really incredible stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think there's two things that come to mind. The first is, I think it's really important to have a sense that I'm going to lean into the community of UT Dallas. And what that means for me is Monica, as you're well aware, I was in your office all the time, talking to you about nothing, asking questions. Here's what I'm going through. What do you think about this case competition? I did the same thing with Lisa and Joanna and the rest of the MBA staff. And I did the same thing with my classmates. I mean, many of the classmates from my time in the MBA program are still some of my closest friends. And that's useful for a number of reasons. But, the utilitarian reasons of career network and so forth are obvious. But I think more importantly, that feeling of I have support to get through what is both a really rewarding and a really challenging program, it was really, really a game changer for me. And that's something that I've relied on throughout my career as well. So who's rowing in the boat with me, wherever I am, whatever the position is, and how can I really lean into those people and provide support for them? I think another aspect of the social element of UTD that is important is also my experience in the MBA was that it was hard, and I think that's a good thing. I don't know how much the degree would be worth if it were just showing up to class and signing my name on a paper and then leaving. And so I put a lot of time in. I remember telling somebody about my experience in the MBA that I remember being in the school, literally physically in the School of Management, 70, 80, 90 hours a week, depending on the week in the semester. I mean, it was really challenging experience for me. And part of that experience is dealing with difficult people, dealing with classmates who I don't get along with, aligning as a group around a target. And I remember there was a group project where we had an agreement that a week later we were going to come back with our stuff prepped and we were going to talk about combining to put the project together. And I dropped the ball. And I had to have a hard conversation with my fellow MBAs, or hard conversations with professors when we didn't meet an objective. And I think that my experience is that is an important piece of the education in an MBA as well, is understanding how to deal with challenging circumstances. The stakes are not nearly as high in an MBA as they are in my career. And so the ability to deal with discomfort and to lean into people and say, okay, this relationship might be damaged because we missed something, but that doesn't actually mean we don't like each other and we have to repair the relationship to finish this project together. Or I've got to, I didn't do well on that assignment, but I'm going to do well on the next assignment. That is also an important muscle that I got to build in the MBA that has helped me in my career.
That's really interesting, Andy. I mean, we talk to a lot of MBAs on this podcast. And, we hear the same story about, how hard it was. And you are not the least bit exaggerating about the number of hours that you were in the building, because I was in the building all those hours too. So I know that you sweated bullets and you worked really hard. But that one characteristic that I haven't heard our other podcast guests talk about is the important part of building empathy for others. I mean, you work in an environment where there has to be some level of forgiveness. Not everybody's on their A game all the time. And it sounds like you didn't expect to have that as one of the returns on the investment. And it sounds like that empathetic characteristic has really played well for you in your career.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I don't know of a business where empathy is overrated. Right. I mean, you can think of even the most, engineering, mechanically oriented business like flying planes or whatever. I mean, I'm sure I could come up with something even more divorced from the customer. If you're going to do a good job, in my experience, I have to be part of a team that's working cohesively together. And good teams almost never have 10 people who agree. Because if you agree, you're not actually thinking, my experience is we're not actually thinking that boldly. There needs to be some disagreement. And in order to get through that disagreement, I need to understand that this person is doing their best job and they're putting forth this idea because they think it's actually going to work. And that's the suggestion that they have. And it's not, I'm sure everybody's dealt in their career with experiences where there are people who are just trying to climb over one another. But, in the modern business environment, I think that empathy is really critical. In healthcare, it's the basis of what we do, which is part of the reason I like working in healthcare. But I also think there's a more important reason to be empathetic, which is that in this time in our society, with a tremendous amount of fission, it's easy to sit in my bubble and not deal with people who are not like me. And that is a recipe for me to start to judge other people and sit in condemnation of them. It's also a recipe for me to not understand my impact. So here's the reality is, as a white man who's a chief of staff for a large company, I have power. And if I don't think about the way that the decisions that I'm doing affect other people, affect patients, affect my coworkers, I'm going to hurt them, or I'm going to perpetuate the systemic racism and structures of injustice that we see in our society. An example of that in my MBA, which I remember being particularly relevant, is I'm the type of person who my parents said, a mark of how people treat people is not how you treat somebody who has power over you. It's how you treat somebody who has no power over you. And so I'm the type of person, like, I say hi to the janitor. I say hi to the person, I'm actually stop and talk to the person that has no power over me. And that's not anything about my character. It's just the way that I was raised. But I got locked out of a room at 3 a.m. when I was pulling an all-nighter on a project in UT Dallas, and the janitors were taking off. And if I didn't know who they were and was willing to say, hey, can you let me into that room? I would have had, 4 hours without my computer and would have turned in the assignment late. So it made a difference to me to be able to connect with other people as a human being. So yeah, I could speak for hours about empathy, and I'm sorry for droning on, but that's a really important piece for me.
Well, I've been in the MBA world close to 34 years, and I hear a lot of students talk about the characteristics that they gained, and I've just not had one articulate empathy in the way that you have. And I agree with you. I think it's a critically important component that anybody can take away, and probably one of the top 5 components that are important in terms of leveraging a top-notch career and being a leader. You can't be an effective leader today without being empathetic.
This episode is brought to you by the UT Dallas MBA program, top-ranked nationally and in Texas. The UT Dallas MBA combines a robust core with 13 concentrations. You have an option to add a second master's degree, and your choices for that include 5 STEM-designated programs. The MBA program has full-time, part-time, online, and other formats. They give you flexibility to fit your MBA education into your busy schedule. The skills and training you will receive are what top employers are looking for. For more information, visit us online at jindal.utdallas.edu/MBA.
So, Andy, I want you to think a minute, because, you literally lived in the building and you had a lot of energy. I get kidded all the time about my level of energy. Well, you topped me in terms of the energy category. So I'm kind of curious, when you look back at that 9 years ago, there had to be some pretty hysterical moments in the MBA program, ones that, will be in your memory for the rest of your life. So can you share one of those really funny, hysterical, unbelievable, I can't believe I did that moments?
Yeah, I could share a really ridiculous moment, but I think energy is great. I want to shout out to anybody with ADHD listening, because all of my ADHD people know that we are not unfocused. We have too much energy, and whatever people are putting in front of us is typically boring, and that's why we're distracted. But I'll give you a great example of ADHD. My mother has ADHD, and she just recently stepped down as president of the American Society of Clinical Pathologists. So she's achieved a little bit in her career. And she says people with ADHD are really actually efficient because they procrastinate forever. And so they only spend a little time working on something. And a great example of that in my MBA experience is the final semester. And I'm not advising anybody to do this who's listening, but in your career and in your personal life, and certainly in an MBA, sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get through. And we had two classes. We had a global strategy class, and then we had a global business, and then a strategic management class. And one was with Dr. Peng, one was with Dr. Des. And I was in a group of 5, and the same 5 were in each class. And we had this huge project for strategic management where we had to do this enormous research paper. And we had this other project in global business, which was not quite as strenuous. And so we agreed as a group that I would just take the global business project. It was just a long paper, and the other group would do the other thing. And that's the way we decided to divide it up. And we obviously, it wasn't like they didn't work on the paper and I didn't work on the other one. But in true ADHD fashion, I did some research, and then I didn't start the paper until the night before it was due. So I went up on the 3rd floor of the business school, and my good buddy, Ben Wilson, who's now a VP at a acquisitions company, you should talk to him if you want to talk to somebody who's really successful and an amazing person. So Ben just sat with me in the room, and I wrote the paper in one night, and our group got an A+ on it, and it got published in Dr. Peng's textbook. So I have a copy of it sitting in my room over here, sitting in my living room. I got a Peng's Global Business textbook, which has our paper on Texas Instruments and Korean use of tablets in their education system. And so, we had done enough work as a group to do the research ahead of time, but at the end of the day, sometimes, the success was, duct tape, bubble gum, espresso, and an all-nighter. And I've had that experience in my career. I've had the experience of coming in at 4 a.m. and banging out a PowerPoint that my president has had to, deliver a couple hours later. And if I treat that as an opportunity, if I treat that as if I think for me, I have to be excited about the pressure, and that's a way that my energy gets activated, as opposed to freaking out about my own insecurity and ego, and then my energy gets dissipated into fear. So if I get excited about it, then I can do some interesting things. And so that was a really ridiculous story, but there's many more stories. There's all kinds of stuff that happened in that MBA. It's a great experience.
Yeah, I remember some of those things. We'll leave those untalked about on our podcast. So I'm gonna play a game with you, Andy. Let's see if we can have a little bit of fun on the podcast.
Sure.
So your go-to food during the MBA program was?
Bistro B is an enormous Vietnamese restaurant. They got 25-cent egg rolls. So for all you poor graduate students, you can get about 30 egg rolls for $6 or whatever. It's about 5 miles from the campus. It's incredible. If you ever want a good bowl of pho, they're open super late. Bistro B, check it out.
It sounds like you have a little experience there. How many cups of coffee did you drink between lead camp and graduation?
Probably 3 a day. So year and a half, 365, probably about 1,500.
That's a consultant's answer to a question.
My swag for you.
Yeah. Do some math there. So tell me, did you have any nightmares during the MBA?
Oh gosh, did I have nightmares? I'll be really honest. During that time, I was growing a lot as a person. I've been sober almost 10 years. I'll be totally frank. I don't care who listens, but for anybody who's got alcohol or drug addiction issues, I got sober during the MBA. So first couple months were particularly challenging for me. And I had a lot of nightmares about that, but about business school, about homework and papers, No, I was really excited. I mean, the MBA for me was, so as I said, my mother's a doctor. I learned very early on that the experience of working with a bunch of smart people on a really interesting problem is engaging and electrifying for me. And that's what the MBA is. You self-select for a bunch of really smart, motivated students, put them on a bunch of smart, motivated professors and sit them in a room for a year and a half. And for me, I enjoyed almost every moment of it. So I didn't have nightmares about business school.
Well, that's the good news. So we're really glad about that. And congratulations on that 10 years.
And one other thing, Monica.
That's really amazing.
I didn't mean to talk over you. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I will say also, if you guys wouldn't mind, you can include my email address or phone number. If there is anybody who's struggling with addiction or ever needs somebody to talk to, I'd be happy to be a resource for anybody.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Andy, this is an unusual time in American and global history right now. The extraordinary impact of COVID-19 on literally a global level has just been overwhelming. So what would you say to somebody who's average age 28, 29, who's thinking that they might want to transition their career like you did? I mean, you literally transformed the trajectory of your career. What would you say to them about the value proposition of an MBA at this time, given what's going on in the world?
Yeah, I mean, ironically, I think this is probably the best time to get an MBA. To just mechanically, for those folks who are interested in terms of the transition that Monica's referring to, I went from a supply chain career to a healthcare consulting career and doubled my salary. So if that's the kind of information that's motivating for somebody to hear, just put that in the back of your head. But more importantly for me, the experience of learning about myself, of growing and of testing myself in an environment like this is critical. And part of what COVID has done, particularly in healthcare, but in lots of other industries, has kind of clarified the roles that are really important and those that aren't. The irony of that essential workers are often the workers that are treated, or that are at the bottom of the totem pole, I think is becoming clear to Americans. And being able to differentiate oneself from their career standpoint and the type of education they've received is really increasingly important. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, having a broad skill set and not, every specialization is really important, and all of us are specialists at some point in our career, but having a broad enough skill set to be able to translate between departments and navigate different groups is really, really critical. And so I can speak for healthcare in particular. If I have in a situation where we have increasing unemployment and, even on the healthcare side, you see docs and other resources furloughing or cutting hours. If we have a single position open and there's a tight candidate pool, the MBA is going to make a difference. So that's the reality. An MBA does not mean, I've had the experience of hiring MBAs that are not as strong as people. I've also hired people who don't even have an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. It has nothing to do with how that person is going to turn out as an employee ultimately. But in a labor uncertain market, it is going to make a difference in terms of the opportunities that are available. And that's what's important to me about it. It's not about, does it fundamentally change the game for me in my career, but it changes the choices that are available to me. And so I would encourage, and particularly when you couple that with the cost of the UT Dallas MBA relative to the other institutions just at the same rank, but also in Texas, the value of the UTD MBA for something that I couldn't turn my back on. And I would encourage the students who are interested to consider that as well.
That's a spectacular answer and definitely a return on the investment for anybody who wants to do it in a down economy. Andy, when you were in the program, you didn't leave anything on the field. You gave it everything. You gave up sleep, time, everything to do as well as you could in this program. If you could go back and do one thing over again because it was so impactful, what would that one thing be that you would just go back and do again because it was such an amazing transformative moment for you?
Well, I have two. I have a bad one and a good one. So the bad one was that this is going to come as a complete shocker to you, Monica, but I was pretty egotistical during that MBA. And, I was playing with the gloves off. I did leave everything on the field, absolutely. And I was not particularly nice to some of my classmates and professors. And, I think, as you get older, those types of choices that I've made about personal relationships are the things that stick with me. Those are the things I regret. It's not, did I miss an opportunity? It's, I chose to speak to somebody in that manner, treat somebody like that. And I wish I could take that back. So that's one thing I would redo. The other thing I would redo from the good perspective is case competitions were incredibly important to me. Everybody's going to have if you go to a UT Dallas or any other good MBA, you're going to have smart students and good professors. And I think UTD really challenged me in that regard. But in the case competition is where you get together with a small group of students around some really amorphous problem, and you have to do everything. So, for example, what got me my position at Humana was the case competition. Humana does a case competition, or used to, every year, where the first prize, in addition to $10,000 for the winning team, was interviews for their leadership development program. And the question that we had is, pick home health or pick telemedicine. Tell us which one we should go into, and should we do it organic growth or acquisition? That's the question. Do your research. You have 72 hours to put together a presentation and mail it in. If you get selected, then we fly you to Louisville, and you guys have to present with, I think there were 16 other teams or 8 other teams that we had to present in person against. And our team was fortunate enough to win. And that experience for me, I think I did probably 6 or 7 of those over the course of my MBA. And they're just so fascinating. And again, it's also an experience where you really have to be tight with this group of a couple of other students, and everything from the research, the quant and finance side, the presentation of the, putting together a PowerPoint, delivering that PowerPoint in some cases, it's all on you. And so that experience really teaches how to thrive under pressure, but also how to leverage a bunch of different skill sets. And that was, and I think my career has followed that. Consulting is essentially doing casework like that, and looking at a discrete and defined problem over and over again. And so I would do case competitions over and over and over again if I had the opportunity. So, yeah.
Wow. Andy, I know that you've articulated amazingly well during this podcast how big an impact the choice of UT Dallas had on you. And that's great. But I would also throw out that, I've been dealing with students, like I said, over 3 decades. And, and I can remember the names and the experiences with a lot of them. You really had a return impact on UT Dallas as well, just bringing your energy, your unpredictability, your honesty. I mean, you were very authentic about who you were. And I think that's an important quality. Whether it's unrefined yet it doesn't matter. That's what an MBA does. It refines somebody, makes them the person that they want to be to lead. So I say back at you that we are as grateful for the impact you had on us as it sounds like we had on you. So I'm delighted about that. And it is such an honor to get to call you back to the GOAT and let you know that you are one of our greatest of all time, and to really thank you for being that representative for our UTD MBA program. And I want you to say to your boss, got to get to know him too. So hopefully there'll be an occasion to bring him on the podcast and chat with him. But we thank you for being here today and having this conversation. And we're not going to forget you for a long time, Andy. I hope you won't forget us.
Oh, I certainly won't. Yeah, if I can be a resource for UTD in any way, or any students, anybody at all, UTD gave me so much, and it's a pleasure for me to give back in any way that I can. So, really appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys today.
You take care, my friend. Be safe and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. I hope that you were inspired by the words you heard from one of our greatest of all time MBA GOATs. If you were inspired to think about getting an MBA degree, I hope that you'll be in touch with us. Give us a call, drop us an email, hop on our website. Be in touch with us so that we can help you make a difference in your future. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Yet Another MBA GOAT podcast. Join us online at MBA.GOAT.com to find episode notes, links, and more. Be sure to subscribe to Yet Another MBA GOAT podcast on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcasting app. If you like what you hear, please leave us a 5-star review. That will help spread the word about the podcast and the Jindal School's MBA programs. To learn more about the Jindal School's MBA programs, go to jindal.utdallas.edu/MBA.